Nothing will end your career as a park ranger faster than failing to respond appropriately to a fire. And, often enough, they don't care if you're caught in it, time or not. The fact that there was a fire and you were nearby can be grounds for dismissal if your superiors are in a foul enough mood. It was, after all, the dry season at the park that I serve at. We were hearing warnings almost daily at how conditions were perfect for a massive conflagration. All of us were on edge at the time, especially me. I was at the point that I was having nightmares about the entire place catching fire, and then it being blamed on me. I almost began having heart palpitations when I saw legitimate fires that were properly contained and cared for. I was making my rounds one afternoon on a day when the park was all but completely empty. So, I pulled up to a spot that had been clearly made to have a barbecue pit. There was a fire in the pit, and it was extending well beyond the stone circle. Nobody was around. The adrenaline that I felt in that moment was terrifying. I was out of the squad car in a heartbeat, charging over to see what I could do to contain the fire, which, as of yet, had not gotten out of hand. As soon as I was standing over the stone circle, though, the fire was gone. This daunted me for only a half second. I then looked around, and I saw that the fire had somehow moved from the fire pit to the prairie grass that the picnic site was carved out of. I began panicking. I may or may not have had a slight bowel movement along with it. I ran in circles for about a half a minute before I made a mad dash at the flames to try and stomp them out. And then the flames weren't there anymore. They were further away, at the edge of the forest that bordered the prairie grass. I checked myself for signs that I wasn't having a stroke or a heart attack. I looked at the immediate area that I was standing in. No sign of having been fire, no burnt grass, ashes, smell of smoke, or any other sign. I gazed at the fire for a moment from where I stood, and it looked every bit like a real fire. I could see the smoke. I could even hear the crackling of the flames. My panic was subsiding under the strangeness of the whole situation, and I marched towards the flames and kept my eyes on them. When I was roughly 15 paces away, they disappeared. When I arrived at the spot, I could see the fire much deeper in the forest. I then felt a paranoia that defied description, but I didn't dare turn my back, so I chased it wherever the fire would disappear and reappear. It was leading me in a straight line, a single direction. I arrived at the remains of a campsite that had been set up to remain hidden. It was located in tall brush, behind a bunch of very thick, dense shrubbery, and even sharp thorns. The difficulty of moving through it made me want to turn back, but it was one of those things where I had come this far. There was no use in turning back now. I began examining the campsite, and I found things that were more terrifying than the phantom fire I was experiencing. A blue tarp full of surgical instruments that had been buried. After looking at them closer, they were stained with old blood. This shook me. I knew there was something else nearby that I did not want to find, but I did. Also, wrapped up in another separate tarp and buried in a shallow grave were two bodies. It was hard to tell who or what they were, because the bodies had been partially burned. My guess was that whoever tried to dispose of them by burning them found out that it wasn't as easy as they thought it could be, so they wrapped them up and tried to bury them hastily. After the police got involved and forensics had their way, they determined it was a boy who had been kidnapped from an hour away, and a girl also from about 3 hours away. The two victims had no ties to each other, which adds to the sickening twist to the entire thing. Just wanted to give you my 2 cents, since I used to be a ranger. I have no idea what happened, because there was a discovery to the aftermath. Let me explain. I was having a coffee break near one of the pavilions in my park. Being entirely by myself, or so I thought at the time. I jumped when an older woman tapped on the glass of my driver's side door. After rolling it down and asking her if there's anything I could do to help, she just stared at me blankly, wondering if she was okay. I began to open my door to step out and help her, and she collapsed right there on the ground. I freaked, began doing CPR. The center of her shirt had been torn off. All there was a hole in her ribcage, where her heart appeared to have been removed. I radioed the whole thing in. People showed up to take care of the body and investigate. That one actually was a huge investigation, and I've never heard another word about it. I've been told to be quiet about it, and people aren't really speaking about it in my field and higher ups. It doesn't even make sense, and I know it's a really strange, bizarre story to happen. I don't even really know how to explain it, but for whatever reason in this job field, it appears that we run into all sorts of stuff that just doesn't make sense. I'm not sure if you're aware of all the bizarre and strange happenings of things that go on in the forest service industry. It's not exactly the most entertaining job in the world, and has many slower moments throughout the day. But there are some times that you just get chilled to the bone. A perfect example of this is back in my early 20s when I was interning for the first few years. We had a very interesting situation. Before I go any further, my beliefs are pretty firm. That is, I don't really believe in much. Anything like Bigfoot, fairies, monsters under the bed. I don't believe in any of that stuff. But this job has made me question things that I normally shouldn't question. At the time, I had been working in my position for around 7 months when we got a call about campers complaining, frantic and hysteric. And they said something about a giant ape breaking through their camp and stealing one of their friends. Naturally, we showed up there, tried to calm them down, but they were in complete hysterics. Well, police got involved and it turned into a full investigation, and we, including me, was a part of a full-on search and rescue for the quote-unquote missing persons, which was a young girl in her late teens that apparently this large gorilla took, or so they described. Now, when they mentioned that, my first thought was Bigfoot, but I don't really believe in that, so I kind of just chalked it up to maybe they had gotten too drunk and partied the night before, and perhaps she wandered off and got lost. But after spending some time with the campers, they were pretty clean and sober. No drugs, no alcohol, just a couple of good kids my age, just partying and enjoying themselves up in the woods. And when I say partying, I'm not talking drugs and alcohol. I'm talking a double date. They were just enjoying their time together, hiking, and being out in nature alone. Their story was that they were camping quietly, and in the middle of the night, one of these large gorilla creatures came to their tent, thrashed around. When they went to go see what was going on, this creature grabbed a hold of the youngest girl of the group, took her, and ran off with her. Now, I don't know exactly what that looks like. This is just their reiteration to us, the Rangers, of what happened. Keep in mind, their body language, complete and total fear, everything was showing us they were in complete and total terror. There's no way they were making this up. If they were the world's best actors and actresses. So, like I said, the police came, took statements, got heavily involved, and a search and rescue party began for a few days. Well, unfortunately, we found no trace of the missing girl, nor could our dogs even get a scent trail. But we found a piece of her tattered clothing about 4 miles away from their camp location, in the complete opposite direction of the park, deeper in the woods, where it's pretty thick and there aren't even any trails around. It was a piece of her tattered clothing, matched via DNA. We have no other conclusive evidence besides that. So, I'm not sure if my hypothesis of her getting drunk and wandering off really matched up at this point once I found that out. After some time, I can't remember exactly at what point we stopped, but the search was given up on, and she was marked as missing and never found. To be honest, that's a case that still sits in my mind a lot. I still wonder what happened to her, and where she went, if anything. Or did something really come and take her? This strange gorilla creature they claim to have saw, that terrorized and rampaged through their camp. While the case is very disturbing in its own right, due to the situation in the story, it's just one of many people like us in the Forest Service have to deal with, more than we'd like to. I've been wanting to write you in for a while and tell you my story, the one that stands out to me the most, of a very creepy situation that happened when I was serving as a ranger many years back. I'd say roughly 7 or 8 now. This takes us back to about summer of 2013. I won't tell you the state or the park. I prefer to keep that private. I don't want any connections to my name to this in any way. After all, you never know with the internet. But I can say it's in the Midwestern area of the United States, closer to the Great Lakes. But that's as much as I'll release. There was talk at the time of my colleagues finding nooses around the park. All around. Not just one. Thankfully, they were empty, but they all appeared to be made from the same rope, tied the exact same way, and it appeared to be that somebody had made a multitude of these things and gone around and hung them up all throughout the park. I thought the whole thing was weird, but they were taken down shortly thereafter. Then a few more months passed, and we got into very late summer, late August, early September. That's when I began hearing talks about it. I thought my colleagues were just joking, pulling my leg, thinking that whole thing again. Even though I did believe them back in the spring when they were seeing it, but this sudden revival of these nooses, it was very off-putting. That is, until I found them myself. I found about 7 of them, all in different areas of the parks, and the most disturbing, places that people can't even get to easily. Places that are far off trail, several miles. Just strange stuff. When we compared many of the nooses side by side, they were the exact same rope material, tied the exact same way, and were even the exact same length. Nobody, and I repeat this strongly, nobody was found hanging in them. These were all just empty nooses. But why were they set up on random branches, all throughout the park, places where we had nobody going to? None of it really made sense. And even still, thinking back about all of this, it still makes me wonder, who set those up, and why?